Hey, how's it going? How's everybody doing? Gonna do another funny or effed up story about my life. This particular story isn't so much about me. It's more about an uncle of mine who passed away not too long ago. And now, understand, I'm not saying this is an insult to my uncle. It's gonna sound like it is, but he's just one of those uncles, and I think just about every family has a relative like this. Kind of one of those know nothing, know it all relatives. I know better than you, and talking about the glory days and fight, like how the fights they got into. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I loved my uncle. He was a lot of fun to be around. You know, I liked visiting him, hanging out and stuff. And he had a lot of respect for me. But there was a lot of funny things about him. And I think, like I said, everybody has one of these relatives. He was my uncle Joe, and I think everybody, like I said, has an Uncle Joe in their family, or it could be your father, it could be sorry to my cousins, but it could be your father, it could be a grandparent, it could be an aunt, cousin, whatever. There's always one of these in almost every family, and so this is just a few of the stories. Sorry, I got itchy eye here. Um, that I'm gonna share with them. I'm just doing this off memory. Usually I'd make a list, but I didn't today because I'm just kind of just doing this spur of the moment. But yeah, so just a couple funny things. Shouldn't be too long of a video. And again, I will stress, my family members, some of them do watch my videos. This isn't me hating on my uncle by any means, not at all. It's almost paying a bit of a funny tribute to him, if anything. But yeah, I will not lie, he was bigoted and a bit of a jerk. So, and I guess you could chalk it up to a generation thing and maybe being in a small town, people he hung out with, I guess. I don't know. He was kind of a pseudo wannabe biker, for lack of a better term. His brother was a biker, and I don't know the name of the club. And even if I did, I wouldn't say it. Just, I don't need at the door one day. But, not that that would ever happen anyway. I'm not really too concerned about that. But he was a biker, and he liked to sort of follow in his brother's footsteps, or sort of compare himself to his brother, I guess, for lack of a better term. Live in his shadow, I guess. I guess that would be a good way of putting it. But anyway, so he was yeah, he was a heavy drinker. He drank his favorite beer in the world, Molson Export. That was the only beer he would drink if he was generally paying for it. The odd time I think I see him drinking Moosehead. Now, if he got invited somewhere, he would he would buy a 2 for a beer, and he would hide it in the trunk of his car. And what he would do is he would go drink all the other beer, and then every once in a while he'd go out to the car and drink one of his because he didn't want anyone drinking his beer. Now, with that being said, he brought a case over. Sorry, I'm all sweaty. I don't know why it's hot in here, but he brought a case to my parents' house one Christmas and left it in the fridge. And I think I was about 16 or 17, and my father didn't mind if I had beers or whatever, right? As long as he didn't want me getting like shittered or anything like that, all licked up. He just was fine if I had a couple beers. It's no big deal, right? He was one of those dads that if I had friends over, if my friends and I, he's not oblivious and dumb. He was young. He was actually 16 years. He's only 16 years older than me, my dad. So he was the father that would let me. You guys are going to go drink beers. Just come here, do it in the basement, drink your beers there, listen to your music, because he wanted to make sure if we're all together in the house, he knows we're safe. He knows we're not going to get a ticket. We're not going to go out and do something stupid. He was like, you know, have something to eat, order pizza, whatever it is, have some beers, listen to your music. I'd rather you're here safe together and I can sort of keep an ear and an eye on you than you running off in the streets and getting into a fight or falling down and hurting yourself or getting arrested, whatever. So, he was one of those dads, which I totally respect that, rather than parents that yell and scream at their kids and they're going to do it anyway. So that was my dad's attitude. If you're not going to do it here, you're going to do it somewhere else. I'd rather do it here. So anyway, my uncle had a case and 2-4. Now in Canada, 2-4 is a 24 pack of beer, as we call it here. I have a lot of people that in the States that watch, so that's Canadian terminology. But so we had a 24 of Molson Export, and he let me, he didn't mind if I had a couple. Now, I was only 16, and I could drink a lot even then. And so I have a few. and he falls asleep on the couch, right? He passes out, and we lived in a townhouse with a big door on the back. And keep in mind, this was Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, around there. So middle of the night, I open up the door and I grab a couple of his beers, and I got my Walkman on. It was Walkman days, and walking around listening to like music, whatever it was I was listening to, just blasting, drinking some beers. I'm get a little bit drunk at this point, and I left the door wide open. So my mom comes down, and he doesn't even have a blanket on him, and he's all passed out in the crate in the fetal position. I was like, "What the hell?" And saw the door was, and she saw my footprints, and she didn't care that I went outside in the middle. I used to go for walks all the time, but so anyway, shuts the door and whatever. I come back. So I come back. I take four more of his beers out of his case, and in my room, in my closet now. My brother lived in the same room after I left, and there was behind the bed there was a big square about 1.5 by 1.5 feet, and that was underneath the bathtub, and I'd hide my beers and things I wasn't allowed to have under there. And my brothers kind of did follow my footsteps with that. So anyway, I went to sleep, and I woke up after my uncle left, and he was losing his shit. He drank all my goddamn effing beers and this. And I didn't hear any of that. I slept through it all. But he was so mad because, he didn't make a lot of money. First, I'll point that out. He was, he's broke as fuck. So anyway, so he was so mad. The ones I drank plus the ones I took were probably about 12 beers, half his case. So he was not happy about that. But he never said anything more about it. But anyway, so skipping ahead, a few other things. He was one of these guys who used to brag about all his fighting skills, and I used to get into fights, and this guy this and this guy that, and I jumped on top of him, so boom, boom, boom. Like every time we saw him, he would talk about all these fights he got into. Now, my dad has gotten into his share of scrapes. My dad, he's not he was angrier when I was younger. He was stressed out, a lot of things, but that was then. But he's mellowed out quite a bit, and he does have some stories about fights he'd gotten into, and they're always fun to listen to because he's my dad, right? It's hero worship, right? And I loved hearing about them because it was interesting. Because I'm a little guy, my dad's a big guy, and just hearing about him being able to knock these guys out that I couldn't even stand up to, in a sense, was kind of cool. But he didn't talk about it nonstop, and it's not like he got into a fight all the time. He got into a handful of fights in his time, and he never backed down because, like I said, he was a big guy, and he wasn't really afraid of anybody. So the only person that he would kind of be nervous about if it ever came to, and it never did and never would because they're friends, was, again, my uncle's older brother that was the biker, because he was pretty tough guy, and I heard some sort of stories through the grapevine. So I can see why my dad might be a little bit, I don't want to fuck with that guy. I'll fuck with anybody else, but I'll leave that guy out of this. But again, it's not about my dad, it's about my Uncle Joe. So I remember talking to him. I was probably around the same age, maybe a little bit older. And I remember he's just going on and on about all these fights he got into. And I remember saying to him, I was like, I must have been closer to, I was probably about 19 at the time, because I remember thinking, I haven't had gotten into a fight since I was in like middle school. Really, like an actual fight. You seem to get into a fight no matter where you go. And he keeps saying these other guys are the problem. Are you sure the other guys aren't a problem and you're just not an asshole? Or you're just an asshole? And everyone got a big laugh out of that. And he didn't know what to do. He was just kind of insulted, but he didn't really have anything to say about it. It was just kind of funny. It's like I kind of shut him down. It's like who cares about all these fights you got into? There's not one person at the table that talks about all the fights they got into. Tell funny stories. We talk about random things that happen, but it's not always about, I jumped on this guy, boom, 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 need him in the face. And, and it seems like wherever he went, like he was telling a story about a wedding he went to, and this guy started with him, got in this big, like, martial arts stance. And it's like, are you sure that actually happened? are you sure the guy didn't piss you off? And then you were lying in bed at night and thinking about how you would have beat him up if it came down to it. Like, because everybody has those kind of fantasies where you're just so mad at somebody or about a situation. Oh, I just want to do this. And then you take that fantasy and start telling it like it actually happened. Maybe that's what happened in his mind, but I don't know. But he also collected junk, like junk. Like he had. Now he lived in Toronto, or sorry, Mississauga. Sorry, but near the Mississauga sort of Toronto border area, on it's Lakeshore Boulevard. It's a big, long street. I think one of the longest in the country, and maybe in North America, from what I understand. Lakeshore Boulevard, longest boulevard, I guess. It's not a, I guess it's not a street. It's a boulevard. I don't know the difference, but anyway, so he would he had this house that he was renting. They lived there for years and years and years, and excuse me, the he was saying, oh, I got all this junk and I'm gonna sell it and do all this, and there is scrap, like not junk, sorry, scrap is what I meant to say, and like metal, scrap metal. And his son, my cousin Stephen, hey Stephen, if you see this, he's kind of doing the same thing, but he's actually selling stuff. He does have a lot of stuff, but he had like a couple cars, garage doors, like everywhere, all this stuff. Now this was his thing, but he never sold any of it. That was the problem. He just kept accumulating it, and eventually they moved. So they moved to another place, and again there was just junk. He was creative though, because he would take the garage doors and actually build sheds out of them and then store. So I'll give him that. So that was pretty cool. And he had a Thunderbird too that he had for years that he was going to sell, and ended up selling it. It was like a 1963, no, sorry, 61 Thunderbird, and he did sell it, and for what his said, $1,000, and I don't know, it was like just a brick of weed or something. He said it was kind of funny because he just couldn't do anything with it anymore. He just sat on it for so long. Now the crazy thing is, my cousin Steven, his son, found out where it was through a friend or something and bought it back. So it's kind of cool that it stayed in their family. Last picture I saw, it had a bunch of crap piled on top of it. Kind of reminded me, my dad had a Firebird, same thing, Formula Firebird, badass car. And it sat in the garage and he just piled shit on it. And well, my dad's thing was, it's my car, I'll do what I want with it. And realistically, of course it is. It just sucks that it'd be such a cool car. It could have been like the Granada we had at one point, or whatever it was, the other car that was the equivalent of a Granada. I don't know. Anyway, so he had this car and he sold it for brick hash, and he built all this shit out of his scrap, but he didn't really sell any of it. And I know when he moved, a lot of shit got left behind. Then he moved again. And it got to the point that he had the place he was renting, or whoever owned it, had probably at least an acre of property, if I remember correctly, maybe even probably about an acre of land. Could be more, I'm not sure. And people, it seemed like, were dropping shit off his yard. And at one point, somebody counted, like they were dropping off cars that didn't run anymore. They would just leave them there. And he was, oh, take them here, I'll take them. And he had like, I don't know, 16, maybe 20 cars. It could even been more for all I know, just randomly parked all over the place amongst all the junk. They had paths. It was literally looked like a junkyard, and it was all scrap metal that could have been sold, but again, he just never sold it. And then he started getting sick later on, and he had his sister took him in, and so I was a little bit sad, and all that stuff got left behind, I guess, and somebody did something with it, probably just scrapped it all because the owner of the property just probably wanted to sell the land. But anyway, he did pass away, sadly, not too long after, a couple years after. They got very sick. But, and I do miss him a lot. But I do have a few more stories about him. And again, these are hateful stories. It's just funny quirks about him. I mean, because he did have a loving side. He did love his kids. His kids were the world. My cousins were his world. Him and his wife, my Aunt Patty, they wasn't a good situation, and they did eventually divorce. Probably the best thing for him. And she met someone else, and that's a whole other story. And I'm not going to get into any details about that. He was a good guy, but a couple more funny stories. There's something I was going to say about the land and him moving out. I can't remember what it was, but maybe it'll come back to me. But I remember as a kid one time, he was arguing with me, and he goes, "Who's older, He said, "You, who's smarter?" And I kind of paused and looked at the ground, and I remember looking up and I could see my dad kind of over his shoulder. My dad's like, he's trying not to burst out laughing, but he's kind of smiling because he knows that I want to say I'm smarter, but I didn't want to get in trouble. And he's like, "Who's smarter?" And begrudgingly, I'm like, "You are." "You see, because I'm older and I know better." And I'm like, You say so." I was probably about 8, 10 years old. I don't know at the time. And around that time, I used to live in Mississauga for a while too. And I lived on a street, there's Bloor Street, and then there's Lakeshore, and they're really far apart. And I walked as a kid all the way along the highway. It was a highway with a sidewalk, like it was, but it was still. I guess it was no, it was What was it? Dixie Boulevard or whatever, Dixie Road, Dixie Road. That's it. But it's kind of almost like a highway. It's super busy, and I walked all the way from there to their house, and I knocked, and no one answered, but the cars were there. So I was like, "Oh shit." And this is way before cell phones or anything like that. So I turned around and walked back, and it was probably a good 3 hour walk there, and I'm walking back, and I guess my parents were worried, and they contacted my aunt and uncle, and then they found me walking along the side of the road, and my parents didn't say too much at the time. They were mad. My uncle's just giving it to me. You're stupid. I go, "I went to your house and no one answered the door." And he's like, "You just come on in," which would have been the smart thing to do. So that time he was right. And I remember he's standing behind me and he grabs me by the back of the throat, or back of the neck, and he's just like, "You ever pull this shit, you had us all scared to death." Which, that's his way of saying, "I fucking love you. Don't do that again. You scared the hell out of us all." So I take that as respect. But he's also one of those guys too. "Back in my day, blah blah blah, and my dad used to do this, and my dad this and that, and we used to get the strap and all this. We didn't have all this luxury." Now I'm Generation X, um, and compared to modern generations like Y and Alpha, whatever I don't know why they call it Alpha because it makes no sense to me because you're beta. No offense. Don't cry. Don't cry. It's okay. It's okay. I take it back. I'm sorry. But, Zoomers or Gen Z, whatever, and millennials and stuff. Yeah, your generation has it easier and all this other stuff because it does. The technology's there, and you're not outside doing the things that we did as Generation X. And we weren't doing the same thing as Gen Xers were doing as they were, but in a lot of ways we were. And you say, "Oh, we all got soft." How do we get soft? We didn't do anything. We're still out riding our bikes. We're still climbing trees. We're still doing all this shit that we're not supposed to do. We're still sneaking off. "Oh, yeah, I'm just up the street." Meanwhile, I'm like half a mile away on my bike in the dirt path where I'm not allowed to be, So we're doing all the same shit he was doing, but he's acting like we're doing it bad. He's insulting our clothes and everything else. And he says, "My day this, my day that." And I remember saying to him, I go, "Your day sounds like it sucked." He was just like, "Oh, you don't know anything." He was like, "Well, yeah, because I didn't live then." Makes sense. It's like when I jokingly insult the next couple of generations after X, it's like, of course you don't know what it's like because you didn't live then. But we're living now, so we can see the difference. But what he was doing in his day and what we were doing in our day really wasn't that much different because we didn't sit around on computers. We didn't have the internet and all the modern conveniences, online gaming and everything else. Yeah, we had VCRs and Walkmans and things like that, but that's really not crazy tech, you know. But oh fuck, there was something else I was gonna say, making that comparison. Hopefully, it'll come back to me. But there was a couple other funny little things. We were outside one time. I was helping him do something, and the radio's on, and Boy George comes on. And keep in mind, he was homophobic and a bit racist. He's very bigoty, you know. But it is what it was, or was what it was, and he was a product of his time. I'll just leave it at that. Um, but Boy George comes on. He's like, "Do you really want to hurt me?" And he goes, "Oh, I want to take a brick and cave your fucking skull in." And I'm just like, wow. And I think, and now I was young then. I wasn't big into Boy George Culture Club or anything like that, not like new wave things. I was more into like metal at the time, like the glam popular metal, like Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Poison, Skid Row, all that kind of stuff, right? So, but I didn't hate Boy George. I just wasn't into his music. And he goes, "You're supposed to be a man and you dress like that." And I'm thinking like, and this is true. a David Bowie song had come on about two or three songs earlier, and he was kind of nodding, listening to it. I'm like, so you're insulting Boy George for being androgynous. I wouldn't have known that word at the time, but it was the same mentality. But you're okay with David Bowie, who that era, a certain era in his life, was incredibly androgynous. I was like sort of making those comparisons in my head. I didn't say it, but I just kind of. And then one other thing we were talking about, and I was a little bit older at the time, and we were talking about like kid shows and things like that. And my cousin or something, I think she said something about Pee Wee Herman. And he goes, "Oh, I hate that guy, and you're supposed to be a man. Why do you act like that? He's just losing it. God, I just want to smack the shit out of you. And why do you got to be like that? Why can't you just be a man? You're a man." And I remember I looked at him. I go, "You do know that that's just a character he plays on TV, right? Like his name is Paul Rubens. You know he's an actor, right? Like that's just a character. It's like saying you want to beat up Uncle Bobby. He doesn't walk around like that. He goes on TV shows in character because they pay him to go on talk shows and things like that to be that character. He's an actor. He doesn't. That's not who he is every single day. If he's just getting up in the morning just as himself, he's not going to put on his little bow tie and walk around and walk, and act all weird and shit. Like he's he's an entertainer for children. That's his character. He did some, things later on in life in a movie theater. I'm not going to say what they are, but some people already know about it. I don't know. My hands are doing that, but he it was an adult theater. Who fucking cares? It's a porno theater. Like he was the only one there. He was the only celebrity there at the time, probably. But compared to what the other celebrities have been going to jail for recently, who cares? He had a little tug in an adult movie theater while everyone else was doing the same fucking thing. But anyway, he was just like, "Oh, I want to be." I was like, and he's arguing, "No, Pee Wee Herman, and that's how he is." I go, "No, it's not." And then I go, "Well, since you know so much about him, you must be his super fan then." And he just looks at me like he's gonna crack me. I'm just like, I'm just saying. Like, but there was something else I wanted to say about him, but I can't think of what it is. But yeah, like I said, everybody's got one of these kind of relatives in their family. They know more than you, even though they don't know anything at all. I don't want to say that. That comes off as more than so. Even though they're wrong most of the time, but they're also lovable and fun to be around, in spite of maybe they might have some sort of bigotism going on in their heads. But again, I chalked it up, and I'll say this just as an excuse. It was a product of his time, but doesn't justify it. I'm just I guess I'm just making excuses for him because he is my uncle, and I do kind of miss him a lot. And no disrespect to my cousins, because I love you guys, and my aunt Patty and everybody else. My dad was definitely his best friend. They were like best friends. Now my dad's not bigoted or anything like that. He has his prejudices and things like that, but we all do, not necessarily racial or, orientation prejudice, just certain things that quirks we don't like. But my dad didn't share a lot of views, and they argued constantly. They were always arguing, and I'm surprised it never got to blows. My dad would have kicked his ass, but I'm surprised it never got to blows. But a lot of people got sick of his attitude, and one of the many things I give my dad credit for is that he stuck by him all these years, right up until he passed away. And so that's really awesome to my dad. A lot of people just couldn't take him anymore and had absolutely nothing to do with him. And then after he passed away, there wasn't a funeral. They did the, what do you call, celebration of life thing. And I'm not even sure how many. There were people that hadn't seen him in years that did show up, but I don't know how many. But my dad was definitely there. My dad was pretty much right there up until the end. And, so that's shout out to my dad, I guess. And the fact that, I don't know, there's something else I was going to say, but I guess I'll just leave it at that. It was a funny video. Sorry, it kind of went a little down at the end. I'm sorry. But anyway, this is just a little funny or effed up story about my life. A little bit of both in this one. A little bit funny, a little effed up. It wasn't about me, obviously. It was about my uncle. And if you want to subscribe, That would be outstanding. I just want to get up to 1,000 just so I can say I've hit that benchmark of 1,000 subscribers, and that would be great. And everybody be safe. And until the next one, bye.